You know, through this method, BP is basically gang pressing locals into its cleanup workforce. This is not merely an issue of pride, though I would, you know, shake the hand of anyone who doesn't want to be a BP employee right now. The cleanup management, I mean, should totally be taken over by the federal government. You know, but BP's denial of business loss compensation to people who refuse to work for them is also probably an attempt to force displaced workers into a totally unsafe work environment. According to Fox News, which I should clarify is not my standard news source, a representative of the Robert Kennedy Center found that former fishermen being employed on the cleanup effort were bringing gas masks and respirators out there, but being told not to bring them, even when bringing their own. They were told by management that it would spread hysteria. We don't want to spread hysteria. Why would there be hysteria? Well, the current president of the Robert Kennedy Center, Carrie Kennedy, said that she went out to the cleanup area herself and, quote, "We had respirators on. They had respirators on. And within half an hour, all of our eyes were burning and our throats were closing and we all had headaches." So why? BP has been using an oil dispersant. It's called something like Corexit 9500 or something like that. And what it does is it's dissolving the oil into the water so it stops floating. Interestingly, such a thing would never be allowed by the environmental authorities of many countries. You know, Britain has banned the use of this oil dispersant. A guest on the Anderson Cooper show proposed that BP is actually using the strategy of sinking the oil in order to make the amount that has actually leaked ambiguous, reducing their cost for damages. Sinking the oil also keeps it out of the public awareness and spreads the cost of the cleanup over time as it slowly washes up on beaches instead of appearing all at once on the surface. When the EPA told BP toward the end of May to use a less toxic dispersant, BP replied rightfully that the EPA had approved of the very dispersant for general use, which only goes to show the general effectiveness of EPA and many other regulators as we've witnessed. They let things slide until the cameras and the pressure are on them. Really, the dispersants are symbolic of, I think, the entire system's attitude toward the environment and social crisis in general. Don't address it, repress it. Don't really confront the issue, just shove it back down under the surface, which only compounds the problem and makes it even unhealthier. Now we'll have a bunch of sunken oil instead of bringing it up to the surface where we can properly pick it up. And the means of repression is also unhealthy. The dispersant is 4 times as toxic as the oil, and is probably a huge part of why the cleanup workers are getting sick. Even EPA testing, which, you know, as I've said, you know, why I might not, you know, give them too much credit, but even EPA testing released Thursday indicates that where the dispersant has been used, 25% of all organisms living at 500 feet below the surface died. The Exxon Valdez oil spill in 1989 resulted in 11,000 cleanup workers making 5,600 visits to health clinics for upper respiratory symptoms alone. We can't even predict what the effects of this are going to be because, well, basically the Coast Guard is covering for these abuses. According to seizebp.org, Coast Guard Admiral Thad Allen, the National Incident Commander for the oil spill, announced that reporters and journalists may be fined $40,000 and face potential felony charges if they come within a 20-meter safety zone around any responsible vessels or booms on the water or on beaches. So police, it's even worse. Police have been turning over information of journalists and photographers that they apprehend to BP security, private security, who then follow them around and harass them. What can we conclude from all of this? Well, first, we need to ban offshore drilling. Neither businesses nor our government regulators have proven themselves as trustworthy of this enormous environmental risk. However, if we're not drilling in the ocean, then we'll be drilling in domestic soil, which is also damaging. The USA has begun considering importing oil from Canadian oil sands, or tar sands as they're known. Environmentalist critics object that refining oil from tar sands actually produces 3 times the amount of greenhouse gas of standard oil drilling operations, to which the tar sands companies reply, it's only about 5 to 15% worse, as if going in the wrong direction is what we want to be doing whatsoever. Representative Henry Waxman of California calls the U.S. government's proposal for this project a, quote, multi-billion-dollar investment to expand our reliance on the dirtiest source of transportation fuel currently available. And then if we're not drilling in domestic soil, then we'll be importing from some other country which is damaging its own ecosystem, or we'll get embroiled in resource wars which carry their own economic, moral, and environmental problems. Therefore, I think it makes sense to talk about this spill as the world's great wake-up call that we need to begin seriously transitioning to an economy where petroleum is a secondary and not a primary fuel source. Total elimination, I like that idea. I'm happy for, moving forward. And this needs to be done on a mass scale. It needs massive government funding, and it needs to happen immediately. Of course, the occasional disaster is not the only reason we need this transition. We also have to be brutally honest about greenhouse gases and climate change that a petroleum-based power grid and transportation system create. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued a report in late 2007 stating that 1995 to 2006 were the warmest 12 years since 1850. The report said in its ultra-moderate scientific language that the panel is 90 to 95% certain that in the last 50 years the annual amount of cold days, cold nights, and frosts has decreased. The world now has the highest concentration of carbon dioxide in its atmosphere that it has had for the last 650,000 years. That's not just longer than human civilization, that's longer than humanity. Like there's now more carbon in the air, carbon dioxide in the air, than there has been since we've even been around. Most of this information came from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The panel is an international body tied up with the UN. It is run by scientists from 130 different countries, and before it issues any statements, they must be approved by virtually every single scientist on the panel, consensus system. And because this is a UN-related body, it can only really make statements with the approval of participating governments. Governments like the USA and China, which are two of the world's most pollution-invested countries. Therefore, the statements of the panel tend to be extremely cautious, moderate, and even conservative. The picture is probably much worse than the panel is depicting, but they avoid publicly rushing to this conclusion out of scientific caution. Their caution probably causes the reports to lag behind the actual existing damage level. Of course, there are some dissenting voices within the scientific community about climate change. These dissenting voices are, of course, well-funded. ExxonMobil alone funded up to 43 organizations with donations ranging from $10,000 to little grassroots groups, AstroTurf groups, to over $2 million to organizations such as the Competitive Enterprise Institute. A statistician at the University of Toronto found that 97% of climate scientists believe that humanity is at least partially responsible for climate change. 97%. So, this should not be a shocker given that industry has released 1.1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution. The fact that climate change skeptics get equal or even greater airtime in the media can therefore clearly be attributed to economic influence. And I think economic influence, as some of you touched on, is a huge part of this whole problem that we need to expose. We have to acknowledge that this whole ordeal basically came from the market. All companies are in a scramble for maximum production because if they don't beat out their competition, they lose out. Such an arrangement cannot possibly have positive consequences for the environment, as companies try to grab from it for free as much as possible in order to minimize their own costs. This creates a constant drive towards short-term profit that discourages slowing down or paying extra for human or environmental safety. High production levels are placed at a higher premium than our happiness or even our safety, as the 11 workers who were killed in the Deepwater Horizon explosion indicated. You may think the idea that capitalism as the cause of environmental damage is far-fetched. However, the fact that a corporation made a bleeding hole in the ocean should make it slightly less hard to grasp. Who benefits from pollution, really? Guiltmongers like Al Gore try to tell us that we do. I disagree. We could have everything we need, everything we have now, and we could even have more without damaging the environment. In the USA, we glorify cars. Do we really love them? We say we do. Actually, we constantly complain about our commutes, about traffic, about the other jerk on the road who could be riding a train or a bus if we built and funded them. It's not ordinary people who benefit from pollution. The only people who make the real profit from it, again, are people with money that you and I will never see. People whose empires blind them to the damage they wreak. We live in a country where 1% of the population owns over a third of the national wealth. The other 99% of us have nothing to gain from overproduction of industrial factors or ridiculous consumer objects. Sure, we may buy them because our TVs tell us to, but, if any of us can afford that anymore. But we don't get the profit margin from it. As we try to propose solutions, we are operating within a framework that is anti-environmental, and part of actually solving the problem involves moving beyond this framework and rethinking many, many things.